I said, the intent of the course is to go through some portions of the grammar of the Coptic language. You'll be able to not just understand the letters and memorize the letters and readily recognize what the language says in terms of the words, but be able to actually understand the phrases that are in front of you. We're going to have a special emphasis on liturgy. Whether it's Vespers, litanies and Vespers and Mans, Awshiyat, or the Quddas itself, the liturgy itself, portions of it such that when a Musbay or somebody else or a deacon is saying something in Coptic, it'll be much more recognizable. We will not go through the entire grammatical breadth of the language itself. It takes more than 10 weeks, 1 hour at a time. Usually when I've taught the class in the past, and I've taught it in graduate school, and I've taught it at the undergraduate level, it's usually 10 to 12 weeks of 3 hours per week. And by the end of the course, students are able to read scripture. We usually start with the Gospel of Mark. And we start reading it from the beginning, and they're able to understand with a dictionary with the words that they don't know. Let's start for the time being. As you can see, you have 5 handouts, as I said, and each of them, one of them has the letters on there. What we'll do today, I'll give you a little bit of background on what the language is. We know what Coptic is, but a little bit of background on how the language came about. And next week, at the beginning of our meeting, I'll have some slides to show you, to give you an idea visually what the language looked like over the centuries. For the time being, Coptic. So Coptic is the latest stage of the Egyptian language that exists. If you're familiar with our typically, or what are casually called hieroglyphics, the language was called Middle Egyptian. And it was one of the earliest stages of the Egyptian language. It was followed in the early centuries, the 1st, 2nd century, with languages called Demotic and Hieratic, which had different scripts. I'll show you that next week. And then eventually, because of the advent of Christianity in Egypt, meaning Christianity entering Egypt by way of Mark the Apostle, by tradition, and then thereafter, the New Testament needed to be translated into a language that the people can read. Why? Those previous stages of Egyptian language were no longer being read by the majority of the people in Egypt. فكانوا محتاجين لغة يقدروا يقروها عشان يفهموا ويسمعوا الكلمة المسيحية, the English, the Christian message. And so that's how Coptic came about. Coptic is composed of a number of letters that are originally Greek. And in addition to that, there's about 7 or so letters that are specific to Egyptian sounds. For instance, this letter is called Jinja. Now if I tell you that the letter is called Jinja, what sound do you think the letter makes? J. In Greek, we of course have Gamma, which always makes the sound G, the hard G. So that's why there's a difference between the two sounds. There's also Chima. What sound do you think Chima makes? Ch. So for instance, a simple verb in Coptic, this, and this letter looks like the I in English. It is also sounds like the I in English. It's chi. Chi means to take or to receive. Okay, and we see this this verb in the liturgy. I'll point it out a few different times. There's also the letter Hori. What sound do you think the letter Hori makes? It's an H sound. In Greek, there is actually no letter to convey that aspirated H sound. There's a different way that this takes place in Greek, but in Coptic, the Egyptian language, the native Egyptian sound, this was one of them that required a letter, and so we have this. So for instance, this looks just like English, it's pronounced just like English O. This is another O. And this looks like a U, and it's pronounced like a U. So it's Ho, U, means day, Yom. Okay, I'm just giving you examples really quickly now. So the language developed such that it became the language that was required and developed to translate the New Testament from Greek to Coptic, such that the Christians such that Egypt can be Christianized over the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. They needed to be able to hear the message in a way and read it in a way that they can understand. What happened, however, is that the language never fully developed for several different reasons, such that القرن التاسع, most likely by then the language was no longer spoken in Egypt at all. تماما. For several reasons, including by then the Arab invasion had required that language for government transactions or for any government type business in Islamic times by then has to be conducted in Arabic, not even in Greek. Before it was Greek and Coptic, and then that forced basically Coptic to start going by the wayside. Among many other reasons why the language died. The language remained, however, as you all know, as part of the liturgical experience of the Coptic Church. فبتستعمل في الكنيسة القبطية إلى الآن، مع إن طبعا في يوناني كتير. There's a lot of Greek in our liturgical practice. Now, what I would like to do, this is just a brief background. I'll have some visual slides to give you an idea of how the language was developed in terms of manuscripts and how the language was used over the centuries when it was being used, and some of the literature that was developed. For instance, the reason Coptic is important in part is because it is very important for biblical studies. الناس اللي عايزين يدرسوا الإنجيل, among the earliest translations of the Bible are into Coptic from Greek. When you want to compare. Likewise, a lot of monastic texts, texts رهبانية, and monastic spirituality was first composed in Coptic. Why? Among the earliest monks, the earliest monastic establishments, settlements were in Egypt. So it was natural for texts to be written in Coptic. I'll show you some of this stuff next week. For the time being, let's start going into some exercises. That way we can start learning some of the letters. What I would recommend is, not to recommend, what I'm asking is by next week to familiarize yourself with the first lesson that you have in your handouts. The first lesson is basically going through the letters, okay? And being able, when you put words together or put letters together, be able to read those letters. So some of the familiar letters that you might be able to see. This looks just like the N in English. This looks like approximately what an M looks like in English. If I were to put this looks like an E maybe. This word, nem. So pronounce it like it looks. Nem means and, wet. Okay. Other familiar letters. So this is the B, this is the alpha, so A, okay? If you were to put this letter, which you might not recognize, sometimes it's called, it depends on whether you want to use the Greek name for it or not, but it's called lambda. If I tell you the letter is called lambda, what sound do you think it makes? It makes an L. Bal means I. It's a word that we see several times in our liturgy. Okay? Here, I should keep this with me. Let's go over a few. By the way, we ordered a portable whiteboard, and it was missing the screws, so that's why we were forced to have to do this. By next week, the board will be standing on the stand. It'll be much easier to work.
When you said lambda, my handout says Lola.
Yeah, depends whether you want to use the Coptic name for the letter or the Greek name for the letter. Lola is the Coptic name for it. Lambda is the Greek name for the letter. Either way, really, it's fine. Let's go over a few, for instance. Okay, so Ma, and if I were to put the letter is called upsilon. This letter looks like a V or looks like a U. So let's just, for our sake, we'll pronounce it the way it's commonly pronounced in church now. So this letter is pronounced as a V. So the whole word will be pronounced Mav. Anybody know what Mav means by any chance? Many of you are exactly that. Mother, exactly. Yeah. Okay, if you have, this is the what's called a iota, and this omega letter in Greek and Coptic is pronounced as an O. And this is, it looks like a T, right? Can somebody pronounce this for me? Yot. As opposed to mother, this would be father. This would be father. Okay? Let's go over some other ones, some other letters that are unique to Coptic. The letter She is towards the lower part of your list on the alphabet. And actually, let's do this. Sheri. So why Sheri? Because this letter is the letter Ro, which pronounces the sound R. As opposed to mother or father, Sheri is you're all this to your own mothers on this side. Your daughter. You're a daughter. So daughter and son in Coptic are very close in how it's spelled. I'll show you that. I'll show you that's different. So give me a second. So Sheri is daughter. Sheri, if it's pronounced like this, is if it's spelled like this, is son. Okay. Now somebody said, well, I heard there's another word called Sheri that means hail to you or peace. It's even though it's pronounced in the Coptic Church today the same, it's actually spelled differently. So here, with the letter Kai.
It's the same sound.
Okay, I'll tell you something. Technically, the way you greet somebody in ancient Greek, you'd say Khayri. Ahlan. Khayri. Salam. That eventually got, the spelling changed a little bit, so that it's Khayri. But technically, it's supposed to be, this letter is supposed to be pronounced as a KH. Unfortunately, in the modern Coptic Church over the last 150 years, the letter has changed the way it's pronounced to She, mostly. Even though sometimes it's pronounced as a Kha, rightly so. So for instance, this is usually in our church, it's pronounced Arshi, which means chief of somebody, head of somebody. But it's supposed to be Arche. It's how it's supposed to be pronounced. Let's go over some other letters. But anyway, so Sheri is the way, it's how it's pronounced now. There's actually, in fact, a scholar that came to, I read this many years ago, who came to St. Macary's Monastery, Dir Abu Muhar. And he was listening to the monks saying the midnight office, singing it. And he was wondering why they kept pronouncing this letter as an SH instead of what he knew to be the proper pronunciation, which is a KH. Nonetheless.
What's the meaning of this, the other one, Sheri, the one with the H?
This one, son.
Son. This is daughter. This is
Yeah. Daughter and son.
Shirin or Shirin?
Let's go over a few other things. So for instance, anybody want to pronounce this one for me?
Koni.
So in Coptic and in Greek, this letter is always pronounced as an S. Soni. So sister. Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah.
Tasoni?
Yeah. So Tasoni, my sister. Tamav, my mother. You will learn what are called possessive pronouns shortly. So Tasoni, my sister. Or, I just wanted to say brother, son. So, traditionally, it used to be that when you see a deacon, you refer to him as pason instead of abuna. For a priest, for a deacon, it would be pason. And so you will learn how to say my and our in a couple lessons from now. There's a list of what are called articles. I had 15 copies, not realizing or not thinking we're going to have 15 students.
It's okay, I'll just take it.
So, Manel, I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you tonight. I'll send it to you tonight. We're just going over the letters for now, and we're going over a few words, and the intent and the goals of the course. So let's.
Mark, do we have a list of the words that you're writing here, or we need to write?
Some of them are in here, some of them are not. This is just introductory. Any word that I'm showing you now, you'll eventually have a list, and you'll be able to memorize them and learn them and do that.
You gotta start with the letter.
So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna start going through the letters more systematically now, and then at home, what I would like you to do is to read through lesson 1 and do the exercises for lesson 1 before next week. Fair enough? Is it a lot to ask? So we're sort of easing our way into things. So let's go over the letters. Alpha. It makes the sound up. Always the sound up. Not eh. The way we use that sound in colloquial Egyptian Arabic. It is a guttural ah sound. Beta. It is, even though it might you see differently on your notes, this letter should always be pronounced as only a B. Even if you hear it elsewhere. You're going to have to trust me on this. It's because there's some things that have changed over the last 150 years in the way Coptic is pronounced in the Coptic Church, which is not necessarily proper or necessarily correct. So this is always a B. So for instance, the rest of these letters you already know. Can somebody pronounce this for me?
No.
Means sin. You always see Nenobi Nanibu, forgive us our sins, forgive us our sins. Something you hear deacons sing often. We already mentioned this letter, gamma. It's always a hard G. Okay? So the letter, when you write it out, it looks like this. Gamma. Okay? Some other letters.
So no other sounds for the ones?
It's only a hard G, ever. It's only a hard G. So for instance, here's a familiar word that we say every single week. Exactly. It is not a Coptic word. In this case, this is a Greek word that means holy. If you wanted to get the equivalent Coptic word for holy, let's see if we can figure this one out. Okay? We're gonna learn this word, this sound momentarily, but remember this is a KH, right? And this is an A, and this is a B. If I told you that this is a double O, pronounce it for me now. Huwab. Oh, ikwab is how we usually pronounce it now. Means you are holy. Okay? Or Is'uwab. She or it is holy. Is what this word would mean up here. Instead of will be Is'uwab. Okay? So let's go over some other letters. Delta. There is this letter epsilon, which is always an sound. Okay?
Epsilon?
There's this epsilon and there's upsilon. So ep, up, salon. These are the names of the Greek letters. In Coptic, there's slightly different names for them. What is the name that they've given it for?
Just
for
A.
It just says A.
A. Yeah.
It's not quite accurate. But I gave you these so that at least you have a list of the letters in front of you. Zeta.
So we corrected to epsilon?
You don't have to. It's not knowing the name of the letter. Yeah, put down epsilon. So it be pronounced. It's spelled like this.
What?
That's for the name for the letter E.
Where is it?
No, the fifth letter down in the list. No, this one. No, this one. The fifth letter down. Eta. Okay, let's go down the next. I skipped one letter. There's a reason for that. Now, in Coptic, besides the fact that they added to the Greek alphabet a number of letters to reflect unique Egyptian sounds, they also added a letter that the only function for it is for it to be the number 6. That's, yes, Maria? The squiggly one, right? I don't know how to write it very well. I have a PhD and I still don't know how to write it very well.
No, we write it the
It's
other
like
way.
street.
I thought the other way.
It's like street.
There. Yeah, that's probably better actually. The reason I write it this way is because you see a variety of different manuscripts مخطوطات وبتتكتب بطرق مختلفة. I sort of always, actually this is more artistic, I'll be honest with you. So it's here. Is that better?
There's a dash in top of it.
and in Coptic عامة, generally speaking, whether this letter or any other letter, we'll get to numbers a little bit later on, there's always what's called, you don't have to learn this, it's called a supralinear stroke. It's basically a line above it, indicating that this letter reflects a certain number. Why? As opposed to in English where we have A through Z for the alphabet, and 1 through 0 for the numbers, there's no numbers in the Greek alphabet. And there's no numbers in the Coptic alphabet that are unique scripts themselves. So to say the number 1 in Greek or in Coptic, you have to have the line above it. See how here there's no line above it? It's alpha. You see this? Now it's a number. The number, and we'll learn the numbers later, but the number for 1 in Coptic is Y, or Y. Or the number 2, beta, with a line above it. So now it is Snav. So it's the number 2. And so forth and so on. For every consecutive letter, the line above it is a consecutive number 1 through 10, then 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and then 200, 300, 400, and so forth. That's how numbers in Coptic work. It's in one of the handouts I'll give you in a few weeks. Let's go over some. So we did, so the number 6 in Coptic, I think it's on the list, it's So'u. You see that there, yes? Okay, again, the only function for this letter in Coptic is to reflect the number 6. That's the only reason you'll see it. Okay?
Why 6 specifically? It just happened like this?
I actually don't know the answer to that.
Because it's the 6th letter in the alphabet.
Yeah, but it was not in the Greek
right,
alphabet.
But now exactly using it only for 6?
Yeah, that's the only reason, and it's a unique script or a unique orthography for Coptic. So they could have, they could have gone with a different, the next letter down in the Greek alphabet and used 6, but they didn't. I don't know the answer to that.
Maybe it doesn't have a sound.
طب من غير الشرطة دي ملوش لازمة؟
Is it?
It doesn't
يعني
exist.
مش letter أساسا؟
Exactly. Yeah, that's the only thing that's for. You don't use this in any word, ever.
عشان يكملوا العدد بس.
So it's an odd, it's probably the oddest thing we have in the Coptic alphabet, this particular letter. It's used as a number, that's all it's used as. اللي بعده zeta. Zeta it looks just like Z or Z in English language. So, and it's only pronounced as that. Okay? And then there's eta. Okay. So now, eta is a letter that can be confusing because of the way it looks. Eta looks like an H, looks like the English H, but it's always pronounced, roughly speaking, as the same as the epsilon. Sound. That's why, when I showed you earlier, this, I said shiri. But it also is very similar to sheri, son, daughter. I often wonder, how there must have been a unique way that they were able to emphasize the word, because when you hear it, it sounds almost exactly the same. So you wonder how people knew whether you're referring to a boy or to a girl when the language used to be spoken. Nowadays, in the Coptic Church, because mostly we're reading, you can tell what we're talking about. When we're referring to, for instance, Saint Mary as the daughter of Israel or something, and then Sheri in reference to Christ, of course, or any other son. All right, so Eta, we did Eta. We're going to have the whiteboard next week, the one with the stamp. You have a question? Yeah.
Most of them are Greek, yani from this, well, the very last ones are the Greek ones.
No, so all the letters, I think it's in lesson 1, if you look at the introductory paragraph. I'll actually, if you don't mind, do you have it in you?
Yeah, 24.
Yeah, so I'll read it and you can read along. That way we'll know what we're talking about. The Coptic alphabet consists of 31 phonetic characters. What does phonetic mean? Each of them has a unique sound. Okay? The character, that sound, that letter, designates a particular sound. There's no two of them that actually have the same exact sound. And even though I said this letter and this letter do make similar sounds, it's not exactly the same sound. And if I were to emphasize, we're not going to emphasize that in this course, but in fact, this tends to be a different kind of sound than this a little bit. But it's almost the same. Nonetheless, if I can read on the rest of it. Sorry. A special numerical character. We just went over that. So'u for the number 6. And a vowel point. I'll get to that momentarily. The first 24 characters, to answer Manel's question, plus the special numerical character, come from the Greek alphabet. Okay? The last 7 characters are what are called, so Demotic, I mentioned to you Demotic. Demotic was a stage of the Egyptian language that eventually was used exclusively and only in pagan temples. Okay, it was not even spoken, really. Modified to match the script of the first 24 characters. Man, what do we mean by that? These are letters that did not exist in Greek. The sound existed in Egyptian languages. All right, and so they basically rewrote the characters in a way to look like the rest of the Greek alphabet. Pronunciation rules vary for some characters depending on whether they occur in words of Egyptian or Greek origin. To some extent, that is true, but it's also in part because the language itself, what happened was basically this. There was a revival in the Coptic Church about 150 years ago to try to promote the learning of Coptic. And at that time when it took place, so far as I understand it, in reviving the Coptic language, they depended on modern Greek pronunciation to try to promote Coptic within the Coptic Church. We're talking in the mid-1800s. And this is where the language, the Coptic language itself, the pronunciation of it, it changed during that period of time from the original pronunciation that it had. All right, next letters.
And Mark, wasn't there like 2 types of Coptic, whether it's in the north or in the south?
Oh, okay. Let's talk about that for a minute. So, as part of my studies, I did work in several dialects of Coptic, lahgat. The one that the Coptic Church uses is called Boheric, Beheri, that it was typically associated with the Nile Delta. However, the most important dialect of all, as far as Coptic literature, as far as Coptic scripture, as far as Coptic academic work, is actually a dialect called Sahiric, Saidi. It is the dialect in which most Coptic literature was written. And it was the most popular to be used until the second millennium, until probably the 12th, 13th century, in that range. And some of the most important Coptic authors wrote in Sahiric. There are many other dialects actually as well. None of them are used, of course, anymore. Fayyumic, Akhmimic, and so forth and so on. Okay? And when you study Coptic at an academic level, you actually study different dialects because they all have differences. And there are writings in each of these dialects that have not been translated into another dialect. Okay? The dialect, the only one we have to worry about is Boheric. And that's the one we're going to learn here. Pronunciation changes from one to the other. So, for instance, I'll give you an example, just off the top of my head. If I told you that this, actually we went over this. What's this letter? Jinja. You can pronounce the rest of this word because you recognize the rest of the letters. Junt. Junt means anger in Coptic. As a matter of fact, we hear it every single matins and vespers. Oli impek junt ibul harun. Lift up your anger away from us. Erfa ghadabak anna. Okay? This is in Boheric. In Sahiric, you don't need to know this. I'm just going to give you a quick example. The letter changes a little bit. So instead of junt becomes, what's this letter? We went over this at the beginning of class. Chima. Chima. My handwriting is bad, I'm sorry. Chont. It's the same word. Just like, for instance, if you look at Shakespearean English versus modern English, there's differences in the way things were spelled. If you even just look at American English over the last 2 centuries, there's differences in spelling. Anyway, let's go over some other letters. Naveen, what's the next letter? Theta? Theta. As Egyptians, sometimes we're lazy about pronouncing THs. This letter is always a TH. It's always a TH. Okay? Very common word that we see, and every other letter here you recognize. Theotokos, the birth giver of God. Of course, referring to Saint Mary. But this letter, theta. Okay? Next letter. Iota. So we already went over iota. Iota looks like an I without the dot. It is always pronounced as an E sound. E, E, E. Unless there's another vowel that comes after it. So for instance, instead of E, if you have an O that comes after it, now it's pronounced as a yo. Or, instead of an O, there's an alpha that comes after it. Now it's pronounced as a ya. Okay? So for instance, I heard that. Yorem. Sorry, Chris. Okay? Without shame, I think. So this word sort of means without, like shame. I'll confirm that actually. I might be wrong about what the word means. Iota, and after that, kappa. Okay. Kappa you already know, I think. Kappa looks like a K. Lambda, or Lola, we already went over this one. Looks like this. So it looks like a jinja. Actually, it doesn't look like a jinja. It looks like a delta, except with missing its bottom. Lola is always an L, or lambda is always an L. Okay? The M and the N, you can pretty much write them to look exactly like English, depending how fancy you want to be with your handwriting. I'm used to writing it in like Sahiric, like this, and then like this. Okay? No. Born and raised here. As far as I know, my dad is from, we're recording, I probably shouldn't say this. My dad is from Simbelawin, which is not in sight. It's a small village, I think. Mama min Mansour. Anybody Mansour? Mansour? Anybody? Nobody Mansour? But I only lived in Egypt for 4 years, so Cairo. So I almost wish I was from like Asyut or something, you know. I'd be like a true Copt.
One more question.
Yeah.
Oh, the spoken Coptic is the hieroglyphic language, right? Well, it's not.
The language, even in the spoken language, as far as we know, it developed over the centuries such that it reflected some of what was originally being spoken as hieroglyphics. But even the grammar, as a spoken language, changed. And the last stage of it is what's reflected in the Coptic language. So it's Egyptian language. It's Egyptian language that changed slightly over several stages. From ancient Egyptian times, so before Christ, into the 1st centuries during Christianity.
And when someone came to Egypt, they were speaking Coptic or hieroglyphic or
In Alexandria, they were speaking Greek.
Greek. Oh, yeah.
The reason, so Alexandria, when Mark was preaching in Alexandria, there's no doubt that he was speaking to Greeks. And he's speaking in Greek. The reason that what prompted Coptic to be developed as such is the need now to spread Christianity outside of Alexandria into the Egyptian countryside, where most areas there was only Coptic being spoken, not Greek. And at that time, there was no longer an Egyptian language that was being written, because the previous stages of the language were not understood anymore in written form. So they had to basically invent a way to write the language that was being spoken at the time. So what did they do? They used the Greek alphabet and added letters to it, as we said. And that's how they're able not just to be able to reflect the Christian message, but translate the New Testament from Greek to Coptic. That's how that's why there wasn't the language at the time. We're talking 2nd century, so about roughly 100 years after St. Mark came to Alexandria. At that time, there wasn't an actual way to write down something in Coptic. They had to develop the language.
And the hieroglyphic was not used.
Not by the time it was not used anymore. There was two other languages, two other stages of the language that are being used by then. I told the rest of them that I'm going to have some slides I'll show you next week to see what the development of the script, I wish I would have done it today, to see what the language looked like stage by stage. You can see the language changing from hieroglyphics, all of a sudden it's smaller letters, smaller figures, and then something that looks a little bit more like scribble, and then all of a sudden now you have Coptic, which looks like Greek letters. So they use the Greek alphabet to reflect Egyptian sounds. So imagine if you're writing Arabic letters to reflect English sounds, or vice versa. That's essentially what happened, because they needed some sort of way of writing the language, and that's what they did, and that's what took place in Egypt. And then, for a variety of reasons, I was saying the language, in my view, did not actually fully develop. It's not as fully developed as Greek, for instance, or as other modern or ancient languages. Syriac is much more developed as a language. Why? Because once Coptic developed, it got stunted with the coming of the Islamic invasion and then the dying off of the language over a couple of centuries. So it never really had a chance to grow. Xe and O. So Xe is a pretty cool Greek letter. It reflects two sounds. The KS sound. Next to last sound, next to last letter on the left side of that page with the list.
Looks like zeta.
Almost.
Double zeta.
Yeah, it looks like a double
zeta
Z.
on top
Yeah.
of each other.
I write it really badly. See, this is the way I write.
عرفت اللخبطة دي بقى.
Let me write for you.
And then O Omicron. Very simple O sound. Yes.
Mhm.
And then there is for we're all old enough in here. Usually the kids that sometimes we teach haven't taken this in math yet. The next letter is pi. Everybody has taken pi.
3.14.
22 over 3.
Yeah. See,
3.4.
I want to hear how many numbers do you know. You just know 3.14 and that's it? You can't repeat.
3.1415.
That's it? Yeah. There's a kid who I think had like a couple hundred numbers. So pi, it's always pi. It's always a P sound. Okay? The next letter, rho, simatov. Okay.
So it's pi, not p.
No, it makes the P sound. The letter's called pi, but it always makes the P sound. Always makes the P sound. The next letter looks like a P in English, but it always makes the R sound, and only the R sound. Okay? Next letter, Sima. We already went over this. Makes the S sound, and always only the S sound. Okay? Tav, the T sound, always makes the T sound. Okay? Sometimes in Coptic, in a few cases, depending, I think this is because of one dialect affecting another, sometimes you'll see the T and the delta being switched back and forth. Why? Because Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, sometimes the way they pronounce the T will make it sound like it's the delta. So sometimes you see the miyana spelled with a T instead of a D, believe it or not. In some manuscripts you see that. But nonetheless, a T is a T. Okay? Epsilon, where you went over this, so the epsilon is this letter right here. This letter has a variety of different uses. By itself, will have a similar sound to these two. اللي هو إيه sound كده. Okay? But if you put, for instance, an O in front of it, هتبقى U, like moose, like a double O. Okay? If you put an alpha in front of it, it'll be of. Or, and a lot of people, disappointedly, they don't know actually how to write our Pope's name in Coptic right now. This is how you write his name in Coptic. Ta, Wad, Ros. So this letter is actually used as a U as well. Because you don't pronounce it Tavadros, you say it's Tawadros. If you want to spell his name this way. Okay? So this letter, upsilon, can be used as a V, can be used as a U, especially in combination with other vowels. Alpha or O, double O. Okay?
So what's the rule?
Depends. Depends.
بعد الآ اتنطق في وبعد الآ في تواترس اتنطق يو.
Yeah, so exactly. So
بتتنطق في آخر الكلام.
yes.
So you can't even tell.
Yeah, what's the rule?
So let me show you.
عايزة أحس بقى.
Let me show you examples because this can be confusing for people. So we start a little bit late, so we have about 10 more minutes, then we'll be done for today. And then you will have your homework. This is in the lesson. Here's the letter upsilon. Okay? If you put an O in front of it, okay, like then it's pronounced as a double O. For example, somebody pronounce this for me. Mu means to die. Okay? Okay.
اسمه او يعني حاجة أحلى.
Fine, fine. Niveen, تفضل.
اسمه او.
Smo. Smo means to bless or to praise. Of course, she's the positive one, I'm the negative one. Okay. Like this, of, as in, mother. Or, to see. Okay. Or, to eat.
الأموال.
الأب.
He's reflecting across.
See, I need to know what to make negative. I'll show you how this is pronounced momentarily. Okay, I should have used this. I'll show you this example in a minute. I'll get to it. So there is alpha and then upsilon with a V. If you have another letter after it, it could either be a U or a V. It depends. You have to remember, Tawadros is not a Coptic name. It comes from the original Greek Theodoros. Basically, we got an Arabic name and we're spelling it in Coptic. Nonetheless, this can either be a U or a V in this case. Okay?
It depends on.
It depends on these examples. So, U by itself.
It's in the middle.
Oh, okay. So, for instance, if I want to, if it's between two consonants, then it's pronounced as an E.
Between
Two consonants, like an R and an N, it's pronounced as an E. If it comes with a vowel in front of it, like an O, it's a double O. It comes with an A in front of it, it's a U or a V. Okay?
So you can't tell?
No, I'm telling you exactly how it's supposed to be pronounced in each case.
Okay, so talk about the U and the V كده تبقى O.
Exactly. Yeah. If it comes with a consonant hina and hina, then it's pronounced as an E.
آخر واحدة دي آفا.
Yeah. If there was such a word, this would be pronounced ava.
That's not a word?
It's not.
Oh, the other one is gonna be
Okay.
This is the epsilon, right?
Upsilon on the right side.
And then on the left side there was the E and you said it's an epsilon as well. So two epsilon.
There's upsilon and there's epsilon.
Which one is the?
Epsilon is the E. This one is this one.
So when it's the end of the word, it's always the end of the word is always V.
Yes. If you have an upsilon at the end of the word, it's going to be pronounced as a V. Like mouth, mother. Okay?
هو اللي أنا كنت عارفاه إن هي لما بتيجي في الآخر الكلام قبلها فاول على طول بتتنطق في.
Yeah. If it's at the end of the word, it's pronounced as a V.
يو دي أول مرة شفتها. بتمشي على
Between two vowels.
It's actually this is one of the things that changed.
not common
No, it's because the pronunciation changed.
ما خدتش
It
انا
shows here that this is the epsilon. And this is, you said that this is the upsilon.
Yeah, there's a few things in this list that need to be corrected. So the one on the right is called upsilon. You can correct that.
Which
Okay.
one?
The one on the right.
This one? Oh, this is upsilon. No, this is
With Hashiman, epsilon. Trust me on this one. It's the names of the Greek letters.
Okay. The right side is the
and this one is epsilon.
All right. Let's go over now. So now we're done. Actually, we have one more letter. It's Greek, right?
When it's between two vowels, what do we pronounce it?
So, for instance,
Y
you
or
or
W?
B you or
طب
B
ايه هو الحروف
pronounce this for me.
Oval.
Uwa
What?
means one.
So that's a W.
Yep. Well,
It's a U.
Actually-
it's a U.
the epsilon
so okay. Let me explain it to you. Give me a minute. Give me a minute. Here's the upsilon. Pronounce this for me. Ooh. Remember, it's a double O. Ooh. Uwa. Uwa. It joins it together. So, ادي كده. Uwa.
So what if the A was a constant? Any constant.
For instance,
So it would have. It'd be nu.
noob.
Nu.
Anybody know what noob means?
gold.
Gold. See, something positive.
That's very positive.
very precious كده تتنطق دبل او
Ah, because there's a consonant after it. But if there is a vowel
Two
after it,
vowels, between two vowels, then
yeah. If it's between two consonants, it'll be a double O. Is that what you're asking?
What if it was between
It
two
needs a
consonants?
lesson by itself, Yaman.
Hold on, one at a time, one at a
It
time.
needs a lesson by itself and many samples. We go over it.
Okay. I will send you a list of many words that use upsilon with how they're pronounced by WhatsApp as a link. That way you'll be able to do some practice at home. Okay. I want to go over the rest of the letters really quickly. The last one that's a Greek is omega. Oh. It looks like a W. It's always pronounced as a long O.
احنا سيبنا شويه
ده احنا
نقصت
فيه
T.
But that's the Egyptian letters. The left omega out.
No, this one.
Is omega at the bottom?
Yeah,
I know you're here.
Omega's right here.
كيو
Is
كيو
omega at the bottom?
It's O-U. It's pronounced O-U right here.
I don't see it. Oh, it's right
It's
there.
right there, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It's not. I skipped ahead. All right.
There's phi and
Phi,
Fa.
Greek letter,
yeah.
F sound. So this one, these letters, you simply have to memorize what it does. Recognize it, then memorize what it does. Okay? Like we already went over the next letter, Chai, which mostly is supposed to be KH. Like in there's many examples where in the modern Coptic Church we pronounce it as a sheh sound, as in sheh, of course, even though this is actually supposed to be pronounced khair. Or for instance, it's supposed to be pronounced arche, but we pronounce it as archi, as in head or cheek, where you want to.
so it's always SH.
No.
There's a
Even till there's not a rule necessarily. Actually, there isn't a rule for it. Technically, there's no rule for it. It varies really by the level of knowledge of the people pronouncing it, the letter. So you're gonna find some people say, for instance, the word for snow. Rehan, pronounce this for me. I know it. I know you do. I know. Pronounce this first. Shion. Okay. Most deacons will pronounce it shion, means snow. Means snow. Imagine, there's actually snow in Egypt. They have a word for snow. However, There's also, some will pronounce it as chiyon,
Which is the proper way.
which is the proper way to say it.
Which is no as well.
Yeah, it's the same exact word. Just whether you want to pronounce it correctly. That is a
You
good
go
question.
with the
That is a good question. You have a point there. Next letter. C? See, this one I actually write nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a PS sound. And only a PS sound. The most common one you might be familiar with.
Or wait, isn't there like a saltillo?
Yeah, saltillo. Or
Song? Wait, no.
alright, Chris. Let's hear it.
Rion.
Sal.
Rion.
So with long words in Coptic, take it one syllable at a time.
Sal. Ti. Rion.
Sal. Remember, this is lambda. صح? The L sound.
Lola.
Or Lola or Lala.
Lola.
Remember, we said this letter that looks like an H is pronounced as a sound. Yeah. R. Salterion. Salterion.
I pronounce it E. H.
هنا?
It is.
Yeah, that's how it's mostly pronounced. It's supposed to be هو اليوتا. It's supposed to be E. This is supposed to be So if you wanna, so the way it's actually pronounced is Salterion.
Okay.
Salterion. Of course, we don't pronounce it this way in the Coptic.
What does it mean?
Salted.
Salted.
Okay. Next letter. Omega. Omega looks like a W. Is always a long O. So it's the same, pretty much the same pronunciation as this, as the Omicron, except typically if you see an omega in a letter, in a word, there's an emphasis on the O slightly more than the O. So slightly a little bit longer. Okay? And now the Egyptian letters. Bida'an, starting from this first letter, these are now native Egyptian sounds that were added to the Coptic alphabet. First one, you already went over this, Shay, or Shai. Next one, Phi. Now, we already said that there's another letter in the Greek alphabet. Yeah. So you wonder, well, I thought every single letter has a unique sound. They do. In Greek, typically this letter had a little bit of P in it. Till this day, actually, you hear in modern Greek that it has some P in the F sound. This is a purely F sound. So this is sort of a PF. So for instance, Philip uses this letter when it's written in Greek. So the name Philip in Greek is actually Philip. It had a little bit of a P in it. To Greek ears, they'll be able to tell the difference. We're just getting used to it now, but you can trust me on this. This is an F sound. You can pretty much pronounce this as an F sound as well. Make your life a little bit easier for you.
Chai.
Yeah.
Chai.
Chai.
Chai is a G.
So chai.
It's a G sound.
Okay, listen up to me for just give me a minute. So this letter is a KH sound. If you remember that this letter also has a KH sound to it, right? There is more of an emphasis in Greek for this letter to have a little bit more of a